A 12-year-old girl was selling cookies to pay for her chemo, struggling to make ends meet, until Clint Eastwood walked up and did something no one expected. What happened next left an entire marketplace in awe and changed her life forever. Watch till the end to witness the power of kindness in action. The open-air market in San Diego pulsed with life. The scent of grilled corn, cinnamon-roasted nuts, and freshly baked sourdough bread drifted through the warm air, mingling with the salty breeze rolling in from the coast. Stalls lined both sides of the bustling walkway, bursting with vibrant colors. Hand-woven baskets, jars of golden honey, trays of freshly picked fruit. Vendors called out to passersby, their voices rising above the distant sound of a street musician strumming a slow, soulful tune on his guitar. Amid the chaos, at the very edge of the market sat a lone folding table. It had no flashy banners or decorations, just a small white sign with carefully written words in neat, determined handwriting. Homemade cookies. Raising money for my chemo. Behind the table sat 12-year-old Madison Lane. Her frame was small, almost fragile, and her posture straight, though the dark shadows beneath her eyes told another story. She wasn't just tired, she was exhausted in a way that went beyond lack of sleep. The heat pressed down on her, beads of sweat forming at her temple, but she didn't complain. She couldn't, not when there was so much at stake. Each cookie on the table was wrapped in clear plastic and tied with a thin ribbon, a labor of love. Madison had spent the previous evening baking them with her mother, rolling out the dough with trembling hands, pushing through the waves of fatigue that never fully faded. She had to take breaks, resting her head against the cool kitchen counter while the oven timer ticked down. But she had refused to stop. This was her fight. Now she sat in the market, hands folded in her lap, watching as people passed by. Some slowed down, reading her sign, offering polite smiles before continuing on their way. Others didn't even glance in her direction. Her heart sank a little more with each passing moment. She had believed this would work. When she set up her table that morning, she imagined selling dozens of cookies, making enough to take even a little pressure off her mother's shoulders. But the reality was far less hopeful. A woman in a wide-brimmed sun hat finally stopped, rummaging through her purse. "I'll take a bag, sweetheart." Madison mustered up a smile, her fingers clumsy as she handed over a package. The woman slipped a $5 bill into the cash box. "Hope you get better soon, honey." Madison nodded, but she didn't tell the woman that hope wouldn't cover the cost of her next treatment. She watched the woman leave, the excitement she had felt that morning slowly fading. She had barely made enough to buy a single dose of her medication. Madison tried to ignore the gnawing feeling of disappointment as she wiped the sweat from her forehead. The afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the pavement, reminding her how much time had already passed. Her mother had tried to talk her out of this. "You don't have to do this, Maddie, I'll figure it out." But Madison had seen the bills stacking up on the kitchen counter, the way her mother's fingers trembled when she opened them. She had watched her sigh in the glow of her laptop screen late at night, searching for answers that didn't exist. Madison had to do something. Baking cookies had always been their thing, before the hospital visits, before the needles and the endless pills, before cancer had stolen normalcy from their lives. Now it was all she had left. She shifted in her chair, rolling her shoulders to shake off the stiffness creeping in. The heat pressed against her skin, heavy and unforgiving. Glancing at the cash box, she felt her stomach tighten. Not even $20. A little boy tugged at his father's hand, pointing at the cookies, but the man shook his head, distracted by his phone. A teenage girl lingered for a moment, but her hands were already full of bags from other vendors. Madison clenched her fists beneath the table. She had spent so much time fighting, against her body, against the sickness, against the odds. And now she was fighting for something else to matter. A woman approached, her gaze flicking between Madison and the sign. She hesitated before leaning in. "Where are your parents?" Madison froze. "I'm here by myself," she said quietly. The woman frowned, shifting uncomfortably. "Well, maybe someone should be helping you. You shouldn't have to be out here." And then she walked away. Madison stared at the ground, her jaw tightening. She knew she shouldn't have to be here. But what choice did she have? She exhaled sharply, blinking against the sting in her eyes. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe she should just pack up and go home. And then she heard it. A hush fell over the market, the energy shifting. It started as a ripple, a murmur passing through the crowd. People slowed their steps, turning in unison towards something behind her. Madison frowned, following their line of sight. And that's when she saw him. At first, he looked like just another shopper. A tall man in a dark button-down and jeans moving through the market with an unhurried pace. But there was something about him. A presence. People whispered his name under their breath as if saying it too loudly would shatter the moment. Others stood completely still, caught between the desire to approach him and the fear of interrupting whatever unseen force had just settled over the market. Madison's heart pounded. She had seen his face before. Her mother had talked about him, the movies, the grit and quiet strength he carried. But now he was here. Clint Eastwood. And he was walking straight toward her table. For a long second, Madison couldn't breathe. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, hands in his pockets, his gaze shifting over her table, the cookies, the cash box, the sign. His eyes lingered on the words, homemade cookies, raising money for my chemo. The world seemed to shrink. It was just her, the table, and Clint Eastwood. And then he reached into his pocket. The crowd leaned in, waiting. Madison's breath caught, a strange mix of hope and disbelief flooding her chest. Was he about to buy a cookie? Say something? Offer a kind word? Whatever it was, she knew one thing. This moment was about to change everything. Madison watched in stunned silence as Clint Eastwood pulled out his wallet. He didn't rush. His movements were slow, deliberate, just like in the movies her mother used to watch late at night when she thought Madison was asleep. There was a presence about him, something solid and unshakable, like the world could crumble around him and he'd still stand tall. He flipped open the leather wallet and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. Madison's breath hitched. "Cookies any good?" he asked, his voice a deep, gravelly drawl. She swallowed hard and nodded. "Yes, sir." Clint studied her for a moment, his eyes sharp yet kind. He didn't look at her with pity, and that made something inside Madison's chest loosen. "Then I'll take one." He placed the bill in the small cash box and reached for a bag. Madison's fingers trembled as she handed it to him. Thank you, sir." The crowd around them seemed to hold their breath. People whispered, some discreetly pulling out their phones to capture the moment. But Clint didn't pay them any attention. His focus was solely on the girl sitting behind the folding table. He held up the cookie, turning it over in his fingers before taking a bite. Madison stared, waiting. He chewed thoughtfully, nodding as if savoring every bite. Then a small smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Not bad. You made these yourself?" She straightened a little. "Yes, sir." "Impressive." He dusted off a few crumbs and glanced back at the cash box. "How much do you need?" The question caught her off guard. "What?" "How much do you need for your chemo?" he repeated, his voice steady. Madison blinked, unsure how to answer. No one had ever asked her that before, at least not like this. Most people just gave what they could and moved on, but Clint Eastwood wasn't most people. She hesitated, lowering her eyes. "A lot. More than I can make from cookies." Clint nodded as if that was exactly what he expected to hear. Then, without another word, he reached back into his wallet. This time, he didn't pull out a single bill. He pulled out several, and he placed them all in the cash box. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Madison's eyes widened as she stared at the pile of $100 bills in front of her. "That should cover a good chunk of it," Clint said casually, "but I think we can do better." Madison looked up at him, confusion and awe warring in her expression. What do you mean?" Clint turned, facing the crowd that had gathered. His voice carried effortlessly over the noise of the market. "All right, folks," he said. "I just had one of the best cookies I've ever tasted. And I think we can all agree this young lady deserves some help. So let's do something about it." The energy in the air shifted. The bystanders, who had been mere spectators, suddenly found themselves part of something bigger. One by one, they stepped forward. A woman in a sundress pulled out a 20. A man in a business suit handed over 50. An older gentleman, who had been watching from a distance, quietly slipped 100 into the cash box before nodding respectfully at Madison. It didn't stop. The donations poured in, each person moved by the scene unfolding before them. Parents nudged their children forward to buy cookies, teaching them a lesson in kindness. Teenagers, normally glued to their phones, put them away to contribute what little cash they had. Madison sat frozen, watching as her table, her simple, little table, became the center of something extraordinary. Her hands clenched together, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. This wasn't real, it couldn't be, but it was. And it all started because Clint Eastwood bought a cookie. An hour later, Madison's cash box was overflowing. The table, once filled with cookies, was nearly empty. Clint remained beside her, watching everything unfold with quiet satisfaction. He didn't need the attention, he wasn't the kind of man who did things for show, but he knew the power of influence. And right now, his influence had just changed a little girl's life. Madison could barely speak. She turned to Clint, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to thank you." He crouched down slightly so they were at eye level. "You don't have to." Tears welled in her eyes, and for the first time that day she let them fall. Clint reached into his pocket once more, this time pulling out a small piece of paper. He scribbled something on it and handed it to her. "This is my number," he said. "If you ever need anything, you call me. Got it?" Madison's fingers curled around the paper, holding it like a lifeline. She nodded. "Good." Clint gave her a small nod before standing. Then, in true Clint Eastwood fashion, he tipped his head toward her and walked away, disappearing into the crowd just as quickly as he had arrived. But his impact remained. Madison looked down at the paper, her heart swelling. Maybe she had started the day feeling hopeless, but now she believed in miracles. And it all began with a cookie. Word of Clint Eastwood's generosity spread like wildfire. Within hours, local news picked up the story, and soon it went viral. Donations poured in from across the country, with people touched by Madison's story and Clint's act of kindness. By the end of the week, Madison's family had raised far more than they needed for her medical bills. The excess funds were set up in a foundation to help other children battling cancer. Clint remained in the background, never taking credit, but Madison never forgot. Months later, Clint received a letter. "Dear Mr. Eastwood, I wanted you to know I'm officially cancer-free. The doctors say I'm a fighter, but I think I had a little help from a cowboy who believed in me. Thank you for everything. Because of you, I got a second chance. And now I want to help others the way you helped me. P.S. I still bake cookies. Maybe one day I'll get to share another with you. With gratitude, Madison." Clint read the letter twice, a rare smile tugging at his lips. He folded it carefully and placed it in his pocket. Some heroes didn't wear capes. Some just bought a cookie. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more incredible stories of kindness, resilience, and unexpected moments that change lives.